Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ala nabiyyina Muhammad, wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Allahumma faqihna fi ddin, wa allimna at-ta'wil, ya Rabbal alameen. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. يا حي يا قيوم برحمتي أستغيث أصلح لنا شأننا كله ولا تكلنا إلى أنفسنا طرفة عين. We ask you, Ya Allah, to make this gathering a gathering of ilm and a gathering that has your blessing in it. We ask you, Ya Allah, to make us from those that are seeking knowledge and those that want to have an understanding of this deen. We ask you, Ya Allah, to give us an understanding of this deen. Allahumma faqihna fi ddin wa allimna at-ta'wil, Ya Rabbil alameen. To start off, inshallah ta'ala, I'd like to start off by mentioning a few ahadith, which we'll start off with and then continue on the class, inshallah ta'ala. The Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, he mentioned, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, and these two ahadith are in regards to having barakah in your wealth and how to attain barakah. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said in an authentic hadith, which was authenticated by Shaykh Al-Albani and collected in Sunan Abi Dawood, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam made a dua, and he said, Allahumma barik li ummati fi bukuriha. Oh Allah, put your barakah, bless my ummah, put your barakah in my ummah, for my ummah, in their mornings. وكان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا بعث سريا بعثهم من أول النهار. And when the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم would send off an expedition or an army, he would send it off in the early mornings. So it is reported that he would send it off in the early mornings. And there's a Sahaba, his name is Sakhr, and the hadith also mentions that وَكَانَ السَّخْرُ رَجُلٌ تَاجِرًا. And Sakhr, he was a tajir, he was a merchant. وَكَانَ يَبْعَثُ تِجَارَتُهُ مِنْ أَوَّلِ النَّهَارِ. And he would start off his business, his trading in the earliest of the morning, right, in the early mornings. فَأَثْرَى وَكَثَرَ مَالُهُ. So he became very rich, he became very wealthy, and he gained or attained a lot of wealth. So from this hadith, subhanAllah, we see that the importance of using our mornings and starting off our day and doing whatever we feel that's important, starting off in the morning and not sleeping in or not wasting our time, especially that time in the morning. That time in the morning is a blessed time, and it is a time that you can get a lot done in little amount of time. And subhanAllah, most of us have experienced this. When you start off your day in the morning, you always accomplish a lot more when you started off early in the morning, right after Fajr. And the Muslim should have we should have our own morning routine where we get up for Fajr, we pray, we do our adhkar, perhaps we may recite some Quran, and then we start off our day doing the tasks and the work and the business that we have to do. The second hadith I'd like to share before we continue with the class is a hadith which was collected by Imam Ahmad in his Musnad, and another hadith which is also sahih, authenticated by the scholars of hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, Inna Allah yabtaliya abduhu bima a'tah. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tests His slaves by which He has given them. So everything that we are given, this is a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَمَنْ رَضِيَ بِمَا قَسَمَ اللَّهُ لَهُ بَارَكَ اللَّهُ لَهُ فِيهِ. So whoever is satisfied, he's happy, he's content with what Allah has given him, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts His barakah in it. وَوَسَّعَهُ, and He increases in it, and He widens it. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَرْضَى لَمْ يُبَارِكْ لَهُ. and whoever is not satisfied or is not content, then Allah does not put His barakah in it. So one of the, subhanAllah, one of the ways that we can, get barakah in our wealth and increase our wealth is by being content. And from the ways of being content is that we have shukran, we have thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of that which He has given. So it is very, very important that we show our gratitude and our thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us, that which He has given. And, subhanAllah, we can go on and on about how to show shukr and thanks. And, that is, or that can be, another, it can be, another class from Muhadara. You can go on for hours and hours how to show our thanks. But generally, showing thanks is a way to, gain more and gain the barakah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَئِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ, and when you give thanks, or if you give thanks, then I will increase in that blessing. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He put barakah in our wealth, and we ask Him to make it easy for us to use our mornings to do that which is important, and to bless our mornings and our time, insha'Allah ta'ala. Allahumma ameen. To continue, so last week we spoke about the pillars of a contract, and we mentioned, we finished the different pillars of the contract, and we are now starting. So we finished the pillars of a contract. Now, something very important, what I want to mention, is that when we were discussing the pillars of a contract, everything that comes under the pillars, so the buyer, the seller, the price and the commodity, the offer and the acceptance, how that is, these conditions that are under the offer and acceptance, the conditions that are under the price and commodity and under the buyer and seller, each of these pillars have conditions to fulfill those pillars. And those are what are considered the conditions of a sale or a contract. So the conditions, from the conditions of a contract, is that it is done presently, in the present tense, is that it must be conducted in one of these three ways, verbally, written, or it must be conducted by a gesture, is that it should not lead to haram. These are from the conditions of the contract. Similarly, if we go back to the buyer and the seller, we mentioned a number of things that they have to be jaiz at-tasarruf, right? They have to have trading competence, right? They have to, and we mentioned what that means, right? It means that they have to be balighun aqilun rashid, right? They have to be over the age of puberty. They have to be aqil. They have to they have to be sane. They have to be rashidun fil bay', they have to have that trading rationale, right? And they have to be free, right? They have to be hur, right? Those are from the conditions of the buyer and the seller. And similarly, we mentioned, in terms of the price and the commodity, we mentioned that they have to it has to be known, right? It has to be something that's known, and there cannot be jahala except in certain circumstances, right? There cannot be any type of ambiguity except in certain circumstances. So these are the conditions of the contract. These are the conditions of the contract. And the conditions of the contract are put by the shari', put by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there is no room to to give or take here. These are put by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now, having said that, we will discuss some differences between the conditions of a contract and the conditions in a contract or in a sale. So number one is the conditions of a sale or the conditions of a contract are from the shari', from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as I just mentioned. And whereas opposed to conditions within a contract, they are set by the buyer and seller. So we have two conditions, two types of conditions. Conditions that are made within the contract. For example, you're buying something, you're buying some dates, for example, and you say that, I'm buying 100 kilos of dates, and, you put the condition that you want the dates to be delivered to you, and they must be separated by, they must be packaged kilo. Every kilo must be individually packaged. That is a condition put by the buyer and the seller, put by the buyer. That's not a condition that is put by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So the conditions that are, the outward conditions, the conditions of the contract are from Allah, whereas the conditions that are in the contract or in the sale are put by the buyer and the seller. The validity of the sale goes back to the conditions of the contract, whereas the execution of the sale goes back to the conditions within the contract. So if one of the conditions of the contract, for example, we see the buyer and the seller, we see that he is not baligh, he's not at the age of puberty, he's below, he's a child. If that, for example, is not present, then the authentication, the sih, the validity of the contract is null and void, and that contract is considered batil, it is invalid, right? And we don't even go and look towards the conditions within the contract. Now, we look at the execution of the contract. When we look at the conditions of the conditions of the contract, if there's a problem, that affects the execution of the contract. So, for example, we're using this example. A person, he orders, dates, 100 kilos of dates, and he puts the condition that he wants each package, he wants 100 kilos of dates packaged, by the kilo, right? Because maybe he's selling it, he's wholesale, he's going to retail it. So he's buying it wholesale, and he will be retailing it. So he wants them packaged, individually, 1 kilo each. Now the seller, he comes and he gives him all of the dates not packaged. So what happened here is the condition of the condition of the sale, the condition within the sale is not met. Now it is the buyer's choice whether he wants to accept this or not, because this is a condition he put, and he can choose if he wants to go ahead with the sale, or he can choose that, look, you didn't fulfill the condition, I will, I have the right to pull out of this contract. The third difference between the conditions of a sale and the conditions in a sale is that the conditions of a contract are not allowed to be overlooked, whereas the conditions within a contract can be overlooked. So similarly, like what we said before, the conditions of a contract, the conditions of the buyer and the seller, the thing that's being sold, and the way it's being sold, these must be done as per the rules of the Sharia. However, if there is a condition stipulated in the contract, then those can be overlooked, and those are connected to the buyer and the seller. They are the ones that can agree or they can disagree if anything was to change. And lastly, from the differences between the conditions of a sale and the conditions in a sale, is that the conditions of all of the conditions, or the conditions of a transaction, are all valid, and the conditions so the conditions of the contract are all valid and correct, because they are from the Shari', they are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, versus the conditions within the sale, they can be invalid, or they can be valid, or they can be invalid. So a person can put a condition that is valid. For example, we go back to the case where a person puts the condition where he wants 100 kilos of dates, but he wants them to be separated, kilo, by the kilo, right? So he wants 100 different packages of dates. that is a valid condition. However, uh, perhaps if he puts a condition which is not valid, you know, he can put another condition which is not valid. For example, he says that, for example, maybe the seller will put a condition that is not valid. For example, a seller can say that, look, I'm selling you this house with the condition that you do not sell this house to anyone else. Right? That is an invalid condition, right? Because it goes against the intent of ownership, right? So that would be an example of an invalid condition. So the conditions of the contract, the conditions of the actual contract are, they are all valid because they are from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, as opposed to the conditions within a contract or within a sale. They can be invalid or they can be valid. It all depends on what type of conditions are met or are put there. Now, let's take this example. So Zaid buys 100 kilos of big luxury ajwa dates from Jamal for 2,500 Canadian dollars with the condition that they are packaged in 1 kilo boxes. So, what are the conditions of a contract that we can take out from here? So I'd like people to type in the chat, inshallah. What are the conditions of a contract that we can extract from this this example? Can you guys see the example? Can everyone see the example? Okay. So if you can type in the chat, we mentioned the different conditions, right? So if we look, number one is we see Zaid, right? Zaid is the first, from the first condition. He is the buyer, and the seller is Jamal. So we have Zaid and we have Jamal. Now, they are buying 100 kilos of big luxury dates. So this is the description. This is the description of the item that is being bought. And what is it being bought for? It is being bought for 2,500 Canadian dollars, right? So this is the commodity, which is the dates. Now, these are the conditions of the contract. Now, if we look at the condition within the contract, the only condition within the contract is, as we've mentioned, 1 kilo boxes, so that he puts a condition that they must be packaged, with 1 kilo boxes, right? So, this is an example that I just used so that we can kind of implement and extract that which we just learned. Moving along. So what type of conditions are allowed in a contract and what type of conditions are not allowed in a contract? So generally, all conditions in a contract are allowed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَوْفُوا بِالْعُقُودِ, and honor your contracts. And the Prophet ﷺ said, الْمُسْلِمُونَ عَلَى شُرُوطِهِمْ, or الْمُؤْمِنُ عَلَى شُرُوطِهِمْ, in another hadith or another riwayah. The Muslim or the mu'min is, or they are upon their conditions. So whatever conditions they make, that they have to abide by them. So typically the scholars have said any type of condition that is permissible, so any type of condition that is permissible is allowed. And we are not allowed to make halal haram or the haram halal. So we're not allowed to, we're not allowed to stipulate any type of haram condition in the contract. Number two is that the condition must not go against the essence of the sale. And we have evidence that conditions are allowed. We have the qissa, or the story of Jabir radiallahu an, and the story, this hadith is mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari, where Jabir radiallahu an was traveling with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted to buy Jabir radiallahu an's camel. So the Prophet ﷺ, he bought Jabir's radiallahu anh, his camel, and Jabir radiallahu anh, he put the condition, he said, I am selling you this camel with the condition that I ride it back to my family, I ride it home. Right? Of course, they're in the middle of travel, so Jabir, radiallahu anh, he doesn't mind selling his camel, but he needs transportation to go home, so he stipulates that condition, and the Prophet ﷺ accepted it and said, you may ride it to Medina. So here, we see that, it's an example of conditions, or of a condition which was stipulated by a Sahaba to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam accepted it. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in a hadith that لا يحل السلف وبيع ولا شرطان في بيع ولا بيع ما ليس عندك. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, it is not permissible to lend on the condition of a sale, or to have two conditions, or two conditions in one transaction, or to sell what you do not have. So these are certain things which are not allowed in a contract. So we'll take them one by one. So first, the Prophet ﷺ said, it is not permissible to lend on the condition of a sale. So this is when a person says, a person comes, for example, I say to my brother, I would like to borrow your car. And, the brother says, sure, I will lend you my car on the condition that you sell me your phone. So he is lending me his car, but he puts a condition that I have to sell him my phone. And that is not allowed, because the Prophet ﷺ, he has mentioned that there is any type of benefit that comes from a loan is considered a riba, right? كل نفع جره فهو riba, right? Any كل نفع جره من القرض فهو riba. Any type of benefit that comes from a loan is riba. So any type of benefit that is from a loan is considered riba, and that is, impermissible. So you're not allowed to lend someone with the condition that he sells you something. The second part of the hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ says to have two conditions in one contract. Now we'll come to this, and the scholars such as Ibn Taymiyyah and Shaykh al-Uthaymeen and from the contemporary scholars, they have mentioned that what is meant by two conditions in one contract is bay' al-Eena, so the sale of al-Eena, and we'll discuss this in the next slide, inshallah. Lastly, in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, or to sell what you do not have, to sell something that you do not possess, or that you do not own. And this is something that we all know. The Prophet ﷺ said, لا تبيع ما ليس عندك, or لا تبيع ما ليس عندك, do not sell what you do not own, or what you do not possess, in another narration. So what is Al-Eena? The first condition, isn't it like muqayada? So we have a question. The first condition, isn't it like al-muqayada? So that al-muqayada, it means to barter. And this is not a condition. it is just it's just a type of sale. So we'll continue inshallah. So what is Al-Eena? Al-Eena is to purchase something on credit over or paying in the future, and then sell that item back to the same person you bought it from at a lesser price. So I've done a little illustration here to further explain. So we have Ali here. He is purchasing this car from Tariq for $10,000, and he will pay it over 3 years. So he'll pay it within the next 3 years. And this is the thing that they will use in this example. They will use a car. Now, Tariq comes back and he buys this car from Ali at $8,000 in cash. So Ali bought the car. So he has the car. Now, he owes $10,000 in the future after 3 years. Now, Tariq comes back and buys that same car for $8,000, but he pays cash. So what happened here? Ali basically owes Tariq $10,000 after receiving $8,000 in cash. So he took $8,000 and so Ali took $8,000, now he owes $10,000, and they used a car to facilitate this type of riba loan. So essentially it is a loan. He got $8,000, now he has to owe $10,000, and they use this car to show that it was a buy and sell to make it halal. So this is something which is prohibited, which is haram. Does everyone understand this example? So usually, explaining Al-Eena is something which is which sometimes needs repetition. So if there's anyone that would like me to repeat it, please indicate that, and I will repeat it, inshallah ta'ala. Is it the same as lease and buyback? Or a different type of interest? I'm not sure what constitutes lease and buyback sales. If there is a contract, it basically it's as I mentioned here, it's someone purchasing something, and he purchases something in the future, right? And the same buyer, the same person that he bought it from, that seller, he purchases it back from him at a lesser price, but he pays cash, right? So a company selling an asset to leasing it cash and then leases it back. So if you're leasing it back to the same owner, to the same person, then that would be considered Eena. If it depends. So leasing is different, right? We're talking about buying here. So a company, for example, I buy a house and then I lease it, I rent it to someone, right? I buy a house from one person, from Jamal, for example, and I rent that house back to Jamal. That's fine, right? You can rent it to someone. You cannot, however, sell it back to him, right? You cannot sell it back to him. And this is, you cannot sell it back to him, So moving on, inshallah. And we'll take questions after, bi'idhnillah. So another question which is relevant to what we just spoke, is intention considered to decide whether it was intent to get immediate cash and he will end up paying more in the future, which is interest? So yes, the intention, is considered. There may be certain circumstances where a person did not intend to do do this type of contract, but he's forced to do it, right? For example, he's in a very, very tight situation and he has nothing else he has nothing. He really needs money, and the only person that him is that one person, right? We also have another contract called a tawarruk, and we'll talk about that later on, inshallah, and the difference. But yes, intention is considered, and there may be, certain circumstances where it could be permissible if, that was not his intention. Wallahu a'lam. So, moving on to the next slide. Invalid conditions of a contract. So, we spoke about, a few invalid conditions, and we'll go into more detailed here, inshallah. So number one is stipulating a debt for a sale. So we mentioned this earlier, that the Prophet ﷺ forbade stipulating a debt for a sale, and that is because every type of benefit that a person gets from a sale, from a debt, is considered riba. Number two, being a workaround for riba. So any type of sale that you're doing and you think you are, you're conducting this with the intention of riba, with the intention of getting a loan, and you're paying more, for example, then this is something which is haram. So if the intention is there, whether it's bay al-Eena, and this is a very good example, bay al-Eena is a good example of this, but there could be another, there could be more examples, more current day examples that the scholars have not mentioned. So the general rule is any type of contract which is a workaround for riba would be considered an invalid condition or an invalid contract. Number three is if it goes against the intent of ownership. We mentioned earlier that the example of a person selling a house, and he puts the condition that you are not allowed to sell this house to anyone else, right? And that goes against the intent of ownership. So that is an example that goes against the intent of ownership. Another example which the scholars give is that you buy something, a wholesaler, he goes and he buys something and he puts the condition that if I do not profit from these items, then I will return it to you, right? And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-kharaju bil-daman." Profit comes from responsibility or from risk, right? So, it comes from your own, you have to take responsibility, you have to take that risk to make that profit. You cannot buy something from someone and then put all the blame or all of the responsibility, all of the risk taking on him. You're buying something and then you're saying that if I sell it and I profit, then it's for me. If I don't sell it and I don't profit, I'm going to give it back to you. This is an invalid condition. The fourth invalid condition would be connecting a sale to something that is unknown. So, an example of this would be, someone comes to sell you something, he's selling you his car, and you say that I buy the car from you if my father agrees. So you tell him I buy the car from you if my father agrees. And you're connecting it to something which is unknown. So you don't know if your father is going to agree or not, right? You don't know, for example, a wife, she wants to purchase something, but she says, if my husband agrees. This is something which is unknown, and the scholars have said, since there is some sort of unknownness to it, then it is something which is not allowed, is a condition that is not allowed to be put in the contract. The fifth condition that is invalid is selling something that is as is. So selling an item as is. So the majority of the scholars, the A'immat al-Arba'a, the four Imams, they have said that selling something as is something which is considered haram. So you're not allowed to sell an item as is. However, we have we have some scholars of them sorry, not the majority, not the force for ai however, the majority of the scholars. So the majority of the scholars say that selling as is haram. However, we have the opinion of Imam Ahmad and Ash-Shafi'i and Ibn Umar and Ibn Taymiyyah, uh, and from the Tabi'een, or from the Sahaba Uthman ibn Affan, which have said selling as is permissible as long as you do not know of a particular fault in the item. And the evidence they use is, we have the story of Abdullah bin Umar. So Abdullah bin Umar, he was selling his slave, one of his slaves, and in his contract, or when he was selling the slave, he said, I will sell you this slave for 800 dirhams with the stipulation that I am not responsible for any defects. So he put that condition that he's selling his slave as is. The person who bought a slave now, he bought the slave and he found out that the slave had a disease. So it had an aib, something that was considered a fault, in those days. And he complained to Abdullah bin Umar. And Abdullah bin Umar, of course, he said, look, I sold it to you with, the condition that I'm selling to you as is. And they argued, and they went to Uthman bin Affan, to judge between them. So the man said to Uthman bin Affan, radiyallahu anh, he said, he sold me a slave with a disease which he did not tell me about. And Abdullah bin Umar said that I sold it to him with the stipulation that I was not responsible. So Uthman bin Affan, he decided that Abdullah bin Umar should take an oath, he should take a half, he should, swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he sold the slave without knowing that he had any disease. And Abdullah bin Umar refused to take the oath. So Abdullah bin Umar, he said, no, I'm not going to take the oath. And out of his own wara, because taking an oath, doing half by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something, which is considered makruh, is something which is considered, disliked amongst the Salaf. So Abdullah bin Umar, he did not take that oath, and the slave was returned to him, and subhanallah, the slave, it recovered his health in his possession, and Abdullah bin Umar was able to sell that slave for 1,500 dirhams later on. So he was selling it for 800 dirhams first, and he was able to get almost double the amount after taking back possession of the slave and it becoming better. Alhamdulillah. And this is the evidence that the scholars use for allowing the sale of something which is selling something as is. So it is permissible. However, if you know of a certain aib, of a certain fault in that product or in that item, then you must tell the customer. If you do not know, then it's fine. For example, a car lot. They may have hundreds of different cars on their lot. Perhaps it's very possible that a person, the owner of the car lot and dealership, he has a car, and this car is perhaps it was on his lot for a year or for 6 months, and he doesn't know, he doesn't remember, he doesn't know any of the defects, if there are any defects in it. And a person comes, he wants to buy the car, he says, look, I'm selling it to you as is, I'm not sure if it's working, if it's not working, I'm not sure of any faults in it, then that's permissible. However, if he knows of a certain fault, then of course it would not be permissible. So we come to the next chapter, or the next slide, which we will talk about prohibited types of sales. So the Prophet ﷺ, in a hadith, and this hadith is in Sahih al-Bukhari, narrated by Sa'id. Sa'id radiallahu an, he narrates that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ forbade the selling, naha anil munabada, forbade the selling of al-munabada, or casting. And the hadith actually gives a definition, and it says, to sell one's garment by casting it to the buyer, not allowing him to examine or to see it. So munabada is when you throw a garment or you throw a product to a person, and whoever catches that product, then he has to buy it, and the sale is complete, and he is not allowed to go back on that sale. He's not allowed to examine it or see it. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, or the hadith mentions, وَنَهَى عَنِ الْمُلَامَسَةِ وَالْمُلَامَسَةُ لَمْسُ الثَّوْبِ لَا يَنْظُرُ إِلَيْهِ. And al-mulamasa, which literally means touching, it is to touch an item without without examining, or without being able to go into it, check it out in details. Just by touching that item, then you have to buy it. The sale is complete, and you have to buy that product. So an example, that we could, that is present. For example, when you go into a game or a carnival, and you have to pay a fee, right? You pay a fee, and everyone is a winner, right? So it's not necessarily gambling, but you don't know exactly what you're going to win, right? There may be different colors, there may be different sizes, there may be different types of prizes, right? Now you have to, sometimes they have these games where you have to go and you have to use some sort of device to pick out your prize, and whatever device you pick out, then you're stuck with that. You have no choice of returning it, right? This would be an example of al-mulamasa, to touch something without the choice of giving it back or to exchange it. The third prohibited type of sale is bay al-hasa. And the Prophet ﷺ is reported that he's نهى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن بيع الحصى وعن بيع الغرر. The Prophet ﷺ has prohibited or forbade the transaction determined by throwing of stones, and any type of transaction which involves some sort of uncertainty. And the scholars, they explain throwing rocks. They explain this type of sale is that in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, in Jahiliyyah, they would have a sale where they would sell land, and they would say, they would put a predetermined price, and they would say, look, you throw this rock, and wherever this rock falls, that is where your land ends, right? So the strong person will be able to throw the rock very far and will get a bigger piece of land, whether versus the weak person, he would not be able to get that large of a land, because he would throw the rock at a shorter distance. Also, they explain that throwing the rock could also mean like when there are a lot of different items on display, and you throw the rock randomly, or you throw it and you have your intention of throwing it on a certain item, and whatever item that rock falls on, you have to take that item for the price you paid. So this is similar to some sort of some carnival games that we have these days, where you pay an entrance fee, and then you have to shoot a box or a prize, and whatever is behind that box or that that blind, then you have to take that item, right? So this is very similar to that, and it's very important that we understand and we study these things so that we don't fall into some type of sales which are prohibited by the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The fourth type of sale which is prohibited is bay al-gharar. So any type of sale that has a gharar or uncertainty or ambiguity in it, and we spoke about gharar and the different types of gharar and those that are allowed and what is not allowed, and we mentioned that al-gharar al-yasir, so a very little amount of gharar or very little amount of uncertainty is allowed, but what is prohibited is a large amount of gharar, an amount of gharar which would affect the price of the item that you are selling. The fifth type of prohibited sales are undercutting your Muslim brother or sister, and we mentioned in detail about this last week as well. When a sale has been completed and you go and you try to offer a higher price to that seller, or if a person is selling an item, you go and you try to undercut the seller, trying to sell that item at a cheaper price to the buyer, right? And that is something which is prohibited in Islam, trying to undercut your Muslim brother. The sixth type of prohibited sales are an-najash, so bid rigging. So the Prophet ﷺ, he forbade the sale. Naha Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam an bay an-najash. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbid the sale of an-najash. And an-najash, the scholars explain this, is an yazira fi as-sil'a man la yuridu shira'uha. For a person to increase in a sale or in a bidding sale, who does not have the intent to buy that sale. And this is usually done by the agreement of the seller. So usually, the seller will have one or two people, or maybe more, and he'll make an agreement with them. He'll say, "Look, I'm trying to raise the price of my products, of my car, or of whatever he's selling. Please come and bid, bid it up so that I can get a higher price." And this is something which is haram. This is something which is haram. The Prophet ﷺ has prohibited us from doing that. So, and the scholars, they mention, if the person has the intention of, if the person has the agreement with the seller, or even if he doesn't have the agreement with the seller, he just comes and he bids the price up with no intention of buying and with no connection to the seller, this is still haram. And there are people that are bad, they are wicked like this, and they have evil intentions, and this is something which is haram, and is something that is forbidden, and is a grave sin in Islam. Also from this is an-najash, the scholars also mention, and they derive from this that telling a potential buyer that you have a higher offer or higher offers, this is something which is also forbidden. So telling your buyers that you have more offers, and the offers are higher than what you're offering me, when it's a lie, this is something which is prohibited. The last type of prohibited sales are bay'ataini fi bay'ah, two sales in one, and we mentioned the meaning of this. The meaning of bay'ataini fil bay' is bay' al-Eena, which we had mentioned in the previous slides. So inshallah ta'ala, we'll finish here, and we'll leave the floor open for questions. And next week, inshallah, we will start al-khiyar, or return options and return policies, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. So if there are any questions, there are a few questions right now, and I will take those. And if there are any other questions in the chat, I will take those as well. Okay, so next week, inshallah, Jazakallah khair for asking. I will put, so next week it will be Ramadan. Ramadan will be starting in about 3 days, inshallah ta'ala. So next week, inshallah, either we'll do it during the day. So in the morning we could do it after Fajr, or we could do the class after Dhuhr, so or around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, or we could do it, um, or we could change it to the weekend if that's better. I will put a survey in the group today, and those that usually attend the class, I would like if you can answer the survey, inshallah, to what time works best for everyone. So I'll start at the top here in terms of the questions, and then I'll work my way down to the bottom, inshallah. So uh, how does copyright conditions relate to this, referring to ownership? So in terms of copywriting, the scholars have mentioned that copywriting, someone's haqq, this is something which is thabit, and this is something which is a new type of ownership. I remember I was in a class with one of the mashayikh in Medina, and he mentioned that this is something that needs more research to be done. However, he did affirm that copywriting, to an extent, people have there are copyright issues, or copyrights should be honored, right? So you shouldn't be copying a software and selling it to someone. You shouldn't be um, you know you shouldn't be doing taking someone's work and benefiting others from it. That's we can say that for sure, that it would be it would be considered haram to take someone else's work and try to sell it and make money off someone else's sweat. Okay. If you want to further ask the question referring to ownership, I don't understand exactly what is referred to here by copyright. But yeah, what is selling as is? Can you elaborate? Okay, when we said sell as is, meaning you go to a store and they say selling as is, where you cannot return the item, right? There is no return allowed or no exchange allowed. That is selling as is. Is bidding halal? So bidding is halal. So if you are if that is the type of sale that you're doing. So if you're doing a sale where an auction, then this is halal. The Prophet ﷺ has reported to set up auctions, or he has reported to be involved in an auction, where he put something out for sale and he asked, men yazid, who will increase, who will offer more, right? So this type of bidding is halal if it is an auction. What about auction sales? Halal? Yes, it is halal. So like eBay is halal, buying and selling on eBay, for example, which is no, there's no problem there. Is buy one get one free allowed? Yes, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that, brother. What about people who are okay? Okay. So if there are any other questions regarding to what we covered, inshallah. Um, okay. The policy in Canada is different from other countries. If you buy something, you have the option to return it. Is this halal or haram? While in other countries they sell and never accept returns. So this is perfectly fine, and we will study return policies next, inshallah. We'll go into detail in the different types of return policies, in Islam. But the default position in Islam is that everything that is sold is a final sale. So everything that is sold is a final sale. Now we have exceptions, and one of those exceptions are if you buy a product from someone and there is a fault in it, it's faulty, you are allowed in the Sharia to return that item. or you can get the difference of the price in that item. So, for example, if that item costs $10 normally, but with that fault, it's still usable, but it would cost less. It would maybe cost $8. Then you're allowed to go and either return that item or you can get the $2 difference, right? So we'll cover return policies more in depth in the next class, inshallah ta'ala. But to summarize, yes, return policies are allowed, and the same policies that we have in Canada that most stores have, 30 days or 15 days or whatever it may be. This is perfectly fine. If a country or some other countries do not have a return policy, they say that we will not accept returns, and that is also fine, according to some of the scholars. I mean, isn't a book bought can be sold by me, but a soft copy cannot? Why is it different? So the brother's asking, when you buy a physical book, you can sell it to someone. But when you buy a digital book, then, can you sell it to someone or not? That's the question, right? Wallahu alam. If it's a digital book and you sell your rights to someone, and you give up that right, so you don't have it on your computer, and they have it, then perhaps that may that should be allowed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So if I buy a car for credit on 3 years until the debt is paid, I am not allowed to sell the car because I do not own it. So if you buy a car on credit for 3 years, you are allowed to sell the car, right? However, you're not allowed to sell the car to the same person that you bought that car from for a lesser price, and for selling it to him by cash. So you can sell that car to anyone you want. You can buy a car on credit for 3 years, and the next day you can come out, you can sell that car to someone else. But selling it to the same owner, the same person that you bought that car from, that is where the problem occurs. Right? That is where the problem occurs. So you're allowed to sell the car to anyone you want except to that person. If you want to return the car to him and he gives you the same amount, then that is fine. Because I do not own it. No, you do own the car. You do own the car. If you buy the car and when you buy a car and you owe him in 3 years, they usually transfer the ownership to your name, and you own the car. It's just that you owe him money. So you own the car, you own the asset, but you owe money to that person, right? So you do own it, and that is not the reason why you're not allowed to sell it to the same person. The only restriction is you cannot sell it to that same person that you bought the car from for a less price in cash. So you can sell it back to him at the same price you got it, or it can be more. The whole thing is that we do not, the whole purpose is that it is not used as a workaround for a riba. If there are any more questions, I can take them. What about if you return the price and get another car? Yes, if you return it for the price and you get another car, that's fine. That's fine. Or even if you return the car and you get credit, for the car. For example, there are 2 cars that are $10,000, and you bought one car for $10,000 over 3 years, and you take it home, and then you realize that no, you didn't want this car, you wanted another car. You go and you exchange it, then that's fine. That's totally fine. وإياك. Okay, inshallah. So we'll finish here بإذن الله تعالى. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. جزاك الله خير.